Let's talk about something tricky. Something that happens in workplaces all the time, but we don't always know how to handle it. What happens when a consensual office romance fizzles out and then turns into a sexual harassment claim? And you might think this is a rare thing, but it's really not. A survey from the Society for Human Resource Management found that this exact scenario is behind nearly a quarter of all sexual harassment claims. Think about that. For every 4 claims an HR professional has to investigate, one of them likely started as a relationship that both people wanted. So that brings us to the big question, right? When you have 2 people with a shared consensual past, how does that history totally warp the way we see a harassment complaint later on? Is it even possible for us as observers to be truly objective? Or do our hidden biases just take over? So here's how we're going to break this down today. First, we'll look at the core problem. Then we'll introduce this fascinating idea called the moral intensity knob. And from there, we'll dive into how the relationship's past and all the context around it can completely change our judgment. All right, so what's the real issue here? Well, the research is pretty clear. Having a prior romance on the books tends to make us judge the person being accused less harshly and the person making the complaint more critically. It's like we put on a different pair of glasses to view the whole situation. What that really means is our internal rule book, our gut feeling for what's okay and what's not. It actually changes. We just don't apply the same standards to a former partner that we would to a total stranger. And that little shift has huge consequences when it comes to fairness in the workplace. Okay, so why? Why do our standards get so wobbly? To get to the bottom of that, we need a way to think about how we make these kinds of ethical calls in the first place. It's this idea called moral intensity. You can think of it like a volume dial for your moral outrage, right? Certain things happen and they crank that dial all the way up to 11, making us feel like an action is deeply, deeply wrong. Other things keep the volume low and we're a bit more tolerant. 2 of the biggest things that turn that knob are 1, how much harm we think was done, and 2, how much we think everyone else agrees that it was wrong. And this whole judgment process follows a pretty predictable path in our minds. First, we have to even see a situation as a moral issue. Then we judge it. After that, we decide if we're going to do something about it, and finally, we actually act, like, say, recommending a punishment. That moral intensity knob can mess with every single step of that journey. Okay, theory is great, but let's see how this actually plays out with real people. Researchers set up this really clever experiment looking at a fictional romance between supervisor Keith and his subordinate, Sarah, to see exactly how their history would change people's judgment of a harassment claim later. They looked at 2 key variables they could change. The first one was the power dynamic. In one version, Keith was Sarah's direct boss, the guy who does her performance reviews. In another, he was a supervisor in a totally different department. Still senior, but without that direct control. The second thing they changed was the motive behind the romance. Was it a companionate relationship where both people were genuinely looking for a partner? Was it just a fling, where they were both in it for fun? Or was it utilitarian, something more transactional, where Sarah was maybe looking for job security and Keith was looking for an ego boost? And the results were just fascinating. Check this out. When Keith was Sarah's direct boss, people blamed him way more. That clear power imbalance just cranked that moral intensity knob all the way up, making his actions seem way worse. But here's where it gets really interesting. Look what happens when the motive for the romance changes. In that utilitarian scenario where Sarah was seen as using the relationship for her career, suddenly, observers started placing more of the blame on her. It's like the perceived illegitimacy of their original relationship totally changed the math on who was at fault later. So, we know the history of the romance matters. A lot. But what about all the other stuff going on around it? A second experiment, this time with actual HR professionals, decided to test that. The researchers wanted to find the specific switches in a situation. The details that would immediately flip that moral intensity knob from a 2 to a 10 for an observer. They tested 3 big ones. First, was the relationship an extramarital affair? Second, did it break a clear, written company policy? And third, how bad was the harassment? Was it a hostile environment with bad jokes and unwanted touching? Or was it quid pro quo, a direct threat like, continue this or you're fired? And wow, the effect was undeniable. As you can see right here, people saw Keith's behavior as way more immoral if the relationship was an affair, if it broke a company rule, or if the harassment was that severe quid pro quo type. Each one of those details acted like a powerful switch,
flipping our moral judgment into high gear.
Okay, so let's put all the pieces together. What this research shows us isn't just a handful of random biases. It reveals a predictable, almost domino-like chain reaction that gets kicked off the moment a workplace romance goes south.
It works like this. You get one little piece of context. Let's say you find out it was an affair. That triggers your moral recognition. That, in turn, makes you assign more blame to the accused, which then leads you almost automatically to recommend a harsher punishment. It's a straight line from a single detail all the way to the final consequence.
This quote from the study just nails it. Our tolerance for harassment isn't some fixed thing. If the context of a situation doesn't immediately set off our moral alarm bells, we subconsciously just become more tolerant of the bad behavior that follows. So what's the big, important takeaway here? It's that our sense of justice, our ability to be fair and impartial, isn't nearly as objective as we like to think it is. In fact, it's systematically, predictably biased. So, to recap the whole thing, we don't judge harassment in a vacuum. The entire backstory of a romance colors our view. Details that seem totally separate, like a company policy, can act as powerful triggers for our moral judgment. And at the end of the day, that first gut feeling of immorality is what drives our decisions about who to blame and how to punish them. And this leaves us with a really tough final thought. We now know that our judgment is clouded by all these hidden factors. We have a predictable map of our own biases. So the question is, what do we do with that knowledge? How can companies, HR teams, and really all of us build systems and train ourselves to see these situations more clearly and to deliver a kind of justice that is actually truly fair?